From Worldwide Technology, this is the AI Proving Ground podcast. For years, conversations about AI in the enterprise have felt theoretical. Big visions, big platforms, lots of promise. But over the past year, something far more practical has happened inside many organizations, and probably yours too. Your software engineers are going all in on AI. Coding assistants have made their way into everyday workflows. Models started writing functions, refactoring legacy code, and generating tests. And almost overnight, software development, the engine of your digital business, began to speed up. Gartner predicts that by 2028, roughly 90% of enterprise software engineers will rely on these tools. And Nate McKie of Worldwide Technology thinks that number may already be reality in many teams. Which means the question for IT leaders has shifted from should we use AI for software development to how do we choose the right tools, measure real ROI, and scale this safely. These are the questions our guests work through every day. Nate leads engineering teams that are already seeing meaningful productivity gains, and Andrew Brydon, managing director of WWT's digital practice, oversees product and software delivery in an environment where new tools are appearing faster than most enterprises can evaluate them. So today, on the AI Proving Ground podcast, Nate and Andrew help us make sense of this moment. What's real? What's hype? And how enterprise leaders can harness AI-powered software development without getting left behind. So without further delay, let's dive in. Nate, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Glad to be here.
Excellent. We're glad to have you back. And Andrew, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about today. We're going to be talking about AI as it relates to AI-powered software development, coding assistance, and the future of what things hold there. Nate, I'll start with you. We've heard you mention a couple times that this coding assistants seem to be the quickest, easiest way to generate some ROI on AI, which is a fantastic start for any organization to start getting to that flywheel. And Gartner, I've read Gartner reports that have said, by 2028, I think 90% of enterprise software engineers expected to adopt these tools. So clearly we've moved beyond the should we consider AI-powered software development and into the, well, how do we assess these tools, which tools right, and so on and so forth. So, if AI coding assistants are becoming more universal, how do we start to think about what tools are right for an enterprise setting?
Yeah, with AI being the fastest adopted tool of all time, generative AI, ChatGPT, it's been interesting to see that enterprises have not been on the same curve, right? Mm-hmm. So you've gotten the downloads and everyone has used it in some fashion, but so many that we encounter just haven't hit it from what they're doing at work every day. But that really hasn't been true on the software engineering side. Software engineers have latched on to coding assistants very early, and that's continued to grow and be a part of what's going on. And so, as you mentioned, Gartner's saying 90+% by 2028. I think that's probably conservative. I think we're already seeing 90+% adoption on some level by software engineers. So those organizations that are out there today and are still waiting around or maybe haven't even thought about it are really starting to fall behind. Because if you think about, what drives this innovation, what's driving AI innovation in general, it's software. And if we can develop software more quickly with the tools that we have, right, that's just going to make that innovation go even faster. And so if your engineers are not taking advantage of that, then ultimately you are going to be left behind in what you're able to do. So I hope that everyone listening out there, if they're listening to this podcast, they're probably already thinking about this if they haven't moved on it already. But if they haven't, it really needs to be high on their priority list.
Yeah. And Andrew, we've talked about it before as well. There's so many of these tools out there on the market. Should organizations just be using all of the tools, or how should they start to wrap their heads around which ones are right for their specific environments or teams?
Yeah, they definitely shouldn't be using all of the tools because, we have teams that spend a good chunk of their time just looking at these tools. And frankly, it's overwhelming. There isn't a week where there isn't a major announcement. Even within the tools, probably most weeks there's a new model, a new combination, a new pricing scheme that comes with the tools. It's a lot. So I think it's important to just think about this in categories. What is the class of what this tool does, and not get too caught up in the details of who's where this week, because if you're chasing, Google's a great example where Google comes out with a new product and everyone's rushing to it and checking it out. And it is a really good product. It's interesting, but you can't, as an enterprise organization, switch tools that fast. There's a certain amount of learning, even between tools that seem to do the same thing. There are subtle differences in how they configure their rules, how they hold on to memories. And these are all great, interesting things, but you could spend your whole time playing with the tools and understanding them. So we're really taking the approach as an organization of let's have a small group of people who can really lead the charge, share these big messages, look for tools that might be differentiated or might be worth considering. And then how do we have a very mindful way to scale this up across the organization?
Yeah, Andrew, I'm curious. When you have our customers coming to our teams and saying, "We see these tools you're using. What should we do? What's out there? What should we adopt?" I think you're right. It's hard to just zero in on one thing because they're constantly leapfrogging each other. At the same time, you don't want to sit around and wait and see who the winner is going to be because you really need to be using these tools today. What advice would you give those customers about how to proceed?
Yeah, I mean, I think as of today, there's a large category of leading products. So obviously, we're big fans of Windsurf. I think Cursor's in that category. I think Claude Code is quickly getting into the mature enterprise product. And there's a group behind that are like, yeah, this is interesting. They have some experimental features. 6 months from now, it could be a decision. So I think you have to be comfortable with saying, we have to make a right decision for now. We have to pick one that's in that leading class that has the sort of security, stability, licensing, data protections we need. But within that class, don't get too caught up on whether your product A, B, or C. And we haven't seen people get in big trouble as long as they're making sensible first decisions. And then have the confidence to stick with it, and then have a plan in the background to constantly validate that decision.
Yeah. It may sound anathema to a lot of IT teams, but we've even seen customers pick like two of them, and say, let's have, especially if they're slightly different categories of tools, let's have a couple that we're going to let our engineers choose from. And that way we're not going to fall too far behind. We're making kind of,
Sure.
laying our bets out in a couple different places.
No, that makes sense. And, Andrew, you gave a little bit of a lay of the land in terms of where we're seeing leaders, where we're seeing, tools that are falling maybe slightly behind. But to your point, these things change constantly. Maybe, Nate, the better way to approach this, and you can always go to wwt.com for those out there. We have an assessment where we have a little bit of a map of what tools are doing what. But what's the criteria here? How should organizations think about measuring what's right for their ecosystem? Maybe some bullet points there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a research article that we put out not too long ago that very comprehensively covers a lot of these categories. But just to hit on some of the elements, I mean, for one, you're going to want to look at the maturity of your staff. If you've got a group that's mainly more junior engineers, and you're sort of used to getting things done by having a volume of people versus a few very experienced people, that's great. You're probably going to want to provide a tool that is more tailored to helping them do their job versus expecting them to have already thought of everything and exactly what the tool would do, and then use those. Recognizing that you're still going to need that senior help or at least team help to review the work that's being done. These tools they may seem like magic. They're not magic. They're not generating perfect code in every situation, but that's absolutely one thing you're going to look at. Another one you might want to look at is, the security of your IP, of what it is that you're creating. How, if you're using these higher level agentic tools, they're going to send your code out to the cloud. Now, you can have protected areas where you can make sure it stays within your private cloud, but it's going to be out in the cloud. It's not going to be something that you can generally just buy and install into your right. data center or on a computer sitting by you. So you need to be aware of that. And if that's a problem, there are some options for you. You limit yourself pretty severely in that case, but there are some options that allow you to run on-prem. And so you might want to look at that, or look at the kinds of of the kinds of code that might be going out and saying, well, when we're working on this, maybe we won't use these assistant words versus when we're working on this kind of project. So that's a couple. And then also, do you want, are you looking for your work to be something that's more creative, something that you're building new, greenfield kind of application where you want to give a lot of freedom and capability and need the engineer to be working very closely with the tool? Or is it more just maintenance, refactoring? We've got an older system, we need to move into a more modern platform. Those tools actually, if the more it's something that's more maintenance or more kind of typical on and on kind of work, you might want to go with something more agentic because the agents are going to handle that kind of task really well versus trying to work on something brand new, collaborate with a whole bunch of people, and then figure out how to have something consistent that works for you.
Yeah, Andrew, anything to add there? It almost sounds like it's a lot of readiness considerations. Is the idea that depending on the level of readiness, Andrew, that you could have two companies using the same tool, but depending on their maturity, they'd get much different results?
Absolutely. Or even, and I think Nate was kind of getting to this, even different parts of the organization that are in different parts of the product life cycle. So one of the things I think about is, we've said this for a long time, we don't segregate our engineers away from our testers, away from our designers. We think about holistic teams, and you almost have to think about a team of AI tools as well. So in a typical product team, we're spending a lot of our time in the visual design phase. Like, what does the UX look like? And really the tools that are strong on that are related but different to the ones that are the best at coding. But what's interesting is they're all starting to bleed over into each other. So what a year ago may have just created you a mock-up using AI and you're like, this is great, now we'll produce working code that's maybe suitable for use as a prototype. And so thinking about how to blend those tools together, and a lot of the same things happening with QA tools, whereas in the past you might have thought about what's the right AI QA tool. Now you have to think about, well, am I going to have 6 different tools on my team, or is there enough crossover that maybe I can blend 3 of them across the team? And then I may have another team in a different part of the organization that's in a completely different place, where they're like, this is a mature product. Our main interest is how do we keep everything patched? How do we keep those 0 days under control? So they'd be using a very different tool to solve for that problem.
Yeah, and you're reminding me, Andrew, of something I've heard you talk about a lot, which is you're not benefiting yourself by optimizing one part of a process. So if you just make one aspect of what you're doing go really fast, you're just going to create a bottleneck down the line. So you were mentioning tools that not just for software engineers, but for designers, for QA, you really need to be thinking about that full life cycle and making sure that you have got tools in place and optimizations or automation or ways to speed everyone up. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a big pile in front of someone's desk and not making any more progress than you were before.
Yeah. Andrew, is that a big barrier that you're seeing kind of in the real world right now?
Yeah, I think it was, and even for us, it was very much a learning experience. So one of our first projects to embrace these tools discovered immediately they had to have their engineers go and help test the product 2 days a week because they were moving so fast. So what we did is we leaned into that and said, how can we enable the QA to be using these tools as well? Another great one and very classic story in software development at this point is deployment and automation, what we've kind of called DevOps over the years. But it's no good generating all this code if you can't get it out. Certainly we see customers who, for very good reasons, have manual change review boards and gated processes to get things out the door. All of these things are ripe for automation with AI. We're not going to have enough people to sit there and manually assess the security on the code that's coming out of all these tools. So as soon as you drastically speed up the coding part of this, security and deployment in general is a huge part of the conversation you have to say, how do I keep pace with this machine that's moving faster and faster?
Nate, We mentioned ROI at the top of the episode here. What is as we move and get more mature with these tools, how do you articulate ROI to stakeholders that need to be updated there?
Yeah.
Is it shifting, or is it kind of always just productivity code that gets pushed out?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's been kind of an industry standard of multiple surveys that have talked about productivity of engineers, and it comes out at around 20%. So you consistently see that across these kind of broad surveys, which 20% maybe doesn't sound like a huge amount when you're talking about some AI and it feels like, oh, it just does things instantly. Why isn't it, 10 or 20 times?
Yeah.
But thinking about a tool that you can give just a class of people in your organization you can give it to and see a 20% productivity increase across the board, there's just not many tools out there like that. So it's actually pretty stunning in the amount of difference that it can make. At the same time, there's ROI that's not obvious. And I know Andrew has some good stories around this of things that the tool can do that just either weren't possible before or do things at a magnitude that it's hard to imagine, where you really do start to see some of that. Maybe, Andrew, you could share a story or two of what you've seen out there.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I get a little echo there.
No, good.
Yeah, it's interesting that the unintended consequences of speeding up. So I think for anyone who's read like the DevOps handbook or all these classic software engineering texts, it's probably not a big surprise to think about deployment. From my sort of more software background, I wasn't thinking about data analysis as a big ripe area that would be integrated into the software process. So what we found somewhat accidentally was give a team tools, give a motivated, smart team tools, and they'll figure out really interesting ways to use it. So we had a really messy data analysis problem with one of our customers where millions of records come in, they're e-commerce records, they're messy, they're poorly formed. And we knew we had to write eventually some SQL to transform this stuff as it comes in the door so our nice, shiny new system could understand it. And certainly we have people who are really good at that, who can think through all the corner cases. That was a great example where, in this case, we gave someone Windsurf, not the perfect tool, but it was the tool they had. And underneath it had an LLM. And by using that LLM and using the fact that these tools are actually pretty good in ingesting a lot of data, we're able to very quickly figure out that we'd missed a major corner case. And that in itself was a great finding to go, you know what, the tool got us 95% of the way there, but there's 5% of the data that it actually couldn't handle. And what we discovered is we were missing data. We would have found that out 3 weeks later if we were doing that manually. So being able to move very quickly has these business consequences as well. The business had to be ready. They had to be able to pull new data. But the upshot of this is, in 2 days, this 4-week plan process was essentially complete to over 99% accuracy on the data ingestion for a software team that hadn't set out to solve this problem.
That's really cool. I love that story. And so, there's all these magical things that can happen. But I think the problem around the ROI question that a lot of executives run into is they instantly start thinking about how it can translate to staff reduction.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, great. I've got a tool that makes everyone more productive, so I don't need as many of these kind of people. And you can certainly think that way. And you could probably, substitute these tools and get rid of part of your staff and see, yes, the same kinds of productivity you were seeing before, more or less. But you got to remember that this tool is available to everyone, right? So if you're doing that, you're essentially doing the same thing in a world without coding assistance of just cutting your staff. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you do that before? If it was just so much easier to have less productivity from your staff, why didn't you just do that before? You're really going to need these tools and the same staff that you have today to be able to work at the same level as your competitors. So rather than thinking about, how many people can I cut from this group, the question is, what can we do today that we haven't been able to accomplish before? Because that's the real magic of these tools, is it lets you do things like what Andrew was describing, dive into problems that looked too hairy or too difficult in the past, come up with new features that you hadn't even thought of before, because now you have not just a code completion tool, but something you can actually have a dialogue with that can help you generate ideas and do things more creatively. So there's a real opportunity there of seeing massive productivity, and it's not just around, let's have fewer people do this.
Yeah, we're not necessarily idea constrained. We're execution constrained.
Absolutely.
I can't take credit for that when I heard Jitu Patel say it at the Business Innovation Summit. But in any case, it's certainly a risk that an executive team or an organization might take that approach where they're potentially slashing staff. It's a risk, something to think about. Nate, what other risks arise when we do use coding assistants? I know in that research report that you and Andrew helped publish, it was things such as over-reliance or getting too much into vibe coding. Maybe a little bit more there.
Yeah. I mean, what can definitely happen is, first of all, just kind of a laziness setting in, right? An engineer sees a tool doing all this work that they were having to do before, and it could naturally turn into, tell the system to generate something. Oh, it didn't quite do it right. Tell it again. Oh, tell it to fix those bugs. And your day becomes just mindlessly pressing the try again button versus being creative, thinking about the problem, thinking on a broader scale. The danger is that these coding assistants suffer from the same limitations that generative AI itself does, which is that it tends to be a very one-on-one tool. It's hard to, how many people are doing a ChatGPT where several of them are doing something at once, right? That's not really how the tool is built or made. It's working on what you asked it to do. It's not thinking about the rest of your team. So you need to be, as the engineer, be the one that's thinking about the rest of your team, thinking about what are the people beside me going to do? How are they going to approach this problem? Am I creating something that's consistent with what they're doing, or that's going to be in conflict with it that we're going to have to work through? So you have to be turning your brain on. And you can't just be expecting that the tool's going to magically do all your work for you and move forward, just like anyone using AI today would do. As a content generator, you can't just have AI generate all your content. That's slop, right? Yeah. So the same thing applies for coding. You can't create slop, or you're going to end up not being able to accomplish the purpose you were looking for in the first place.
This episode is supported by Cloudflare. Cloudflare enhances internet applications performance and security, ensuring fast and reliable user experiences. Protect and accelerate your websites with Cloudflare's global network.
Well, I know there's other risks to get to, but Andrew, how do you combat that laziness? I mean, obviously it's human in the loop, but what about as we introduce agents and we hear about software developers, or just anybody for that matter, managing teams of agents that can do this? You're potentially starting to talk about collaboration. Is that the right path or the wrong path?
I think it's very interesting, and the agents are kind of extending this idea. What I've seen a lot with AI is if you give it something very general, it will do a huge amount of work. It will run out of context, and it will blur the middle. So we've all seen this. If you tell it to create a picture and you're in a picture AI and you say, create me a picture of something very explicit and very targeted, it tends to do a pretty good job. If you tell it to go do something very broad with lots of detail, when you look closely at that picture, what you find is it's taking a lot of shortcuts on the detail. Kind of like my kids. It's like, I'll do it at a top level, but if you look really closely at the details, I've kind of got bored and started to rush. I think as we're thinking about building these tools, if you give it something very general, like, hey, go build me an e-commerce platform, you're going to get something that at a very superficial level looks like an e-commerce platform. And so really, to me, what's intellectually amazing about doing these things is a lot of the time is you're thinking about, how do I chop this up into the right size piece that the LLM is going to be very effective at solving this problem? So I'm not going to tell it to go build a product. I'm going to go tell it to build a set of endpoints that do this one well thought out thing. And then I'm going to come back in a different session and I'm going to go, okay, now, and maybe even a different tool, but I'm going to say, now build me the best UI that can utilize that API. That's a lot more targeted, and it's almost always way more successful. So whether you're thinking about agents or locally, now I'm thinking about, how do I become the orchestrator of this pattern? maybe I have 6 agents and it's great that they can do all these things, but now I've got to think about which agents are good at building those APIs, which agents are good at looking into my data and understanding my data structures and how I'm structuring my database, and which ones are going to create me something visually stunning. So a lot of the art and the skill, and frankly, what makes this a lot of fun to do is now I get to think about how I'm decomposing the problem. But kind of to Nate's point, if your decomposition of the problem is go solve the problem, it's kind of boring. It's not much fun. And eventually it becomes pretty frustrating because the LLM is not good at that. No one's good at being directed with vague goals. And so you just kind of get into this backwards and forwards of go do something vague. You didn't do what I wanted. Try again. But actually, that's kind of fun and inspiring and a really interesting engineering problem, because I think our best engineers, that's the way they've always thought. So that's why we see our senior people kind of embracing these tools. Oh, that makes sense to me. That's the way I always decompose the problem. And so they tend to be very successful with these tools.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about senior developers there. What about junior developers who are coming in, or the future workforce that's coming? I mean, chances are they're learning with these tools already, but there's got to be some risk that they're just not learning maybe some of the fundamentals or some of the stuff that you would learn from a junior-senior kind of relationship.
Yeah, exactly. The way that junior engineers learn and what they learn is going to change dramatically, because it's not just about, the path used to be understand basic programming and then understand how to do that in a language, and then understand what some of the algorithms and libraries around that language can do and how you use them, and then start building systems and thinking about how systems are putting together. And it's almost like you cut out that whole part about the language where you go from, I need to understand how software works in general, good, but then I need to understand how big pieces of software are architected and talk to each other, and just what Andrew was talking about earlier about how an API makes sense over here, and having another system do this job rather than reproducing it here. You've got to be thinking about those things, and that's going to take coaching. That's going to take trial and error. And it's critical for organizations who are releasing these tools to their teams to recognize that there's going to need to be some more collaborative time between their engineers, especially the senior to junior engineers, to help them see, yes, you had a task to do, you used this tool to do it, the way you did it does technically work, but here's what is not quite right, here's what doesn't quite fit into our system, here's where the LLM fooled you into thinking this was a good way to do this, and here's how we really want to make sure that's done. And it becomes so much about just like Andrew said, how to constrain the task, how to constrain the system, so it's not reinventing the wheel every time it's doing something. It's using what it already has versus trying to recreate it. So it becomes about understanding where those constraints fit in, how the pieces fit together, and how to get your piece to work properly and communicate with the LLM in the right way to do that. So it's a very different learning path than what you would have done 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I think we've been leaning into that model on my team, and it's been very interesting because traditionally I've had very senior people, architects, senior architects, and for the first time in a long time, we're actually bringing in junior people who are AI natives at this point. They were spending their time at college writing websites on the side using AI. Like, we don't have to convince them on the tools. We don't have to tell them they're going to use the tools. It's just kind of assumed. What's been great is for the senior people on the team, we've deliberately paired them up. And it's actually been very rewarding for the senior people because they get to have those coaching and mentoring moments. Hey, these are the architectural principles. Even if it did get it right, this is why it got it right. This is the interesting thing it's doing, that you're just kind of taking at face value that it's building that way. So I think the junior people are really appreciating it. I think the senior people are getting a lot out of this way of working.
That's interesting. Not necessarily something I would have thought of off the top of my head. Andrew, how else is that changing the team dynamics, where you're now at a point where you're having juniors come on to the team who have those AI skills natively built in? Is it creating any different ripples that maybe surprised you?
I mean, really, it's been that positive ripple of
Yeah.
it's invigorating. It's great. It's great to have people on the team who don't have the bad project experience from 10 years ago and are like, oh, we better not do that because I tried it once and it didn't work out. And so it's really good to have people who are coming in. One of the things I love about these tools is it makes trying something cheap. So, we've always talked about proof of concept and prototyping, and it's a great and it's a valuable thing to do. I think we've all fallen in the trap of spending so much time doing it that that's the thing that ends up going to production.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to build the POC, and 6 weeks later, you're like, man, we just spent 6 weeks on this thing. We better ship this. Now we're in a world where I can turn to the team and I can go, wow, you've got some really interesting ideas there. Everyone spend one day and go build a prototype. And then we'll pick which one of those 3 ideas is the best idea. So it gives you the luxury of time. And it's a weird thing. We talked a little about what this means for team configurations and how everyone has a backlog. The thing I've noticed is for the best engineers, it gives them the luxury of thinking time. That I think we've all, pulled cards or worked that kind of story or feature where you get to the end of it and you're just exhausted. You're like, it took twice as long as we estimated, and it had a pile of bugs, and I finally got it fixed. And all I want to do is get this thing committed and into the build pipeline so I can move on to the next card. And not that we won't have work like that, but what's nice about the AI is often the feeling is, man, that code got written a lot quicker than I expected. Maybe now I can go back and ask the LLM, hey, are there better ways to do that? Or did I miss anything? Or did I miss the corner cases? And when we talk about quality, that's one of the stories we're hearing a lot is it's not that the happy path was necessarily overwhelmingly faster, but I got enough time that I could actually think about the corner cases and get in front of the defects and, run an informal security audit to go, you know what, I don't really have time to go back and check the permission on every endpoint. Would you mind just examining my code base to make sure I haven't accidentally leaked the wrong data out? And they're the luxuries that we just don't have when we're all heads down on keyboard every minute of the day. So it's sort of opening up a space for quality here that I think the best people are taking that opportunity to go, you know what, I can actually add some polish to this thing. And often that's the fun part of working a story.
Well, that's the fun part. I don't mean to take us to the unfun part, but you talked about data leakage. So, Nate, I'm going to ask you what other security concerns might exist. I know there were several security points in the research paper that you had talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that we continue to hear from customers is in relation to model context protocol, MCP interfaces, because model context protocol, just briefly, is a way for an LLM to talk to another system and be able to go and get what it needs and inject that into its thought process, its answers, how it's concocting whatever the outcome is that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. It's great. It's basically just a format, an interface. But what's interesting is that MCPs have come or saw their main use basically with code assistants, because very often as you're creating a system, having a way to go and either query another system that's out there that's got information that you need, or maybe even just trying things out internally to see what your database says about what does this data look like and incorporate that into your response. All of that's tremendously useful. But at the same time, it's a pretty lightweight protocol. It doesn't have a lot of heavy security capabilities built into it. So if you're just sort of wide open, able to talk to any MCP server that's out there with the coding assistants that you're using, you could very easily leak IP. You could leak data, or in the most devious case, you could poison your own code base or LLM with something that comes back to you that's really not appropriate. So we've seen a lot of customers saying, how do we work with this? And the tool vendors are seeing this. And we're definitely seeing some ways that they are allowing basically a whitelist of MCP servers as a start, or maybe some ways of evaluating what's out there, or watching the information that's going across the wire, and essentially making sure that nothing unsafe is happening. But that's just another factor that you need to take into account with these tools.
I mean, Andrew, as you see this kind of unfold in real time, are there guardrails, frameworks that we've put in place to kind of tackle some of these security issues?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I think it's another version of one of the things we've talked about is when you go faster, when you have these tools, every part of the pipeline is under pressure. So, maybe a few years ago, we would have set up our build pipeline. We would have put some static security tools in that build pipeline, and that would have been enough. I think now we're really, again, turning to AI and saying, what can we do? Is there a Agentic-based LLM that can sit there on every pull request and actually do that security evaluation? Now, obviously, you don't want to have MCP putting a pile of bad code into your code base. But if you are in that situation, it'd be nice to have a different LLM sitting further down the pipeline that can detect it well before it's deployed to a system. So it's a challenge and it's an opportunity at the same time. And I think this system level thinking becomes more and more important. And as always, security is part of this whole system. Robustness, I think, is another one. Error tolerance is something that really has always been a sort of really advanced level engineering skill. It's one thing to throw a database transaction into a code base. It's another to think of all the different ways it can fail and what all the non-happy paths are. And I think that's where mindfulness from project leadership may be at that level to say, this is an opportunity. You have tools that actually understand this stuff. It's fascinating just to go out to Copilot or your LLM of choice and have a conversation about some of these bigger discussions. It's not an obvious, we don't think of Copilot as the tool that an engineer is going to go to figure out how to make these big decisions. But sometimes it's just useful to get out of the IDE and think about these architectural questions in another context. And I think that's where it's nice to think about, hey, who's my family of tools that I have here to help me through this journey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, recognizing that things do change all the time at a rapid pace, it's getting faster. Nate, how's that scorecard? At the beginning of this episode, we talked about assessing some of these tools. How is the scorecard going to shift as we go into 2026? Is it, agentic AI is going to change the way we look at these tools, or is there other technologies or other things that we need to be looking out for?
Yeah, first of all, agents are definitely here to stay, and the power of having not just you sitting and looking at a module at a time and coding through it and getting some help on that versus an agent that's going and actually creating its own modules or modifying multiple areas of your code practically at once. All of that's going to be the future, and it's a matter of how do we understand that and make sure that we're constraining it properly, as we were just talking about. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting, I think, that we're moving into, and we're already seeing customers looking at this, is what we said before, that it's not just one tool. We're going to start to see, and we're already seeing, an ecosystem of tools that are building up around this act of using AI to develop code. Whether it's a tool like Coder is a partner we've worked with who creates virtual environments for engineers to work in, gives them all the tools that they need, and gives them really total freedom and safety from some of these other issues we were just talking about the possibility of code leakage and all that. If everything's happening within a virtual environment and you've got your walls, you don't have to worry about that. So tools like that will be great. There's tools like Sonar Cube from Sonar Source, where it will go after the fact, after you've done your work, and start looking for what are the common, areas where, the agents tend to fall down, or systems tend to not work very well after you've used these assistants. Let's find those for you and pull them out and make that part of the build process so that we're seeing them right away. Just a couple of examples, but we're going to see more and more of those kinds of tools that help you overcome some of the limitations, as well as enable different parts of your team so that you're not having that local optimization we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And Andrew, certainly a lot of potential with what Nate's talking about here. And, the opportunity is ahead of us, but what types of dynamics will that place on software teams? How are they going to have to react to those advancements?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe the one nuance I'd say is absolutely agents are here to stay. This is going to be additive, not replacing.
Mm-hmm.
We're still going to have software engineers sitting down with these tools, doing that one-on-one. This is a tool on my laptop. The cloud didn't make laptops go away. People still have computers sitting in front of them, and they're more and more capable every year. It's not that we all move to Chromebooks that don't have their own capabilities. I think to me, it's a very natural progression, and really, like Sonar Cube is a great tool, and I've been using it for a long time, and even pre-WWT, so more than a decade at this point. And I think it's natural. All these tools we rely on, the security tools that live out on the network, like as every part of this becomes AI enabled, everyone else gets pressured to build that in. Sonar Cube can't keep up with a list of static rules if that's not the way the code's being generated. So I think really for teams, this is going to feel like, oh, finally, the tool set that I'm used to using is catching up with me. Some of the deployment platforms, a lot of these tools are becoming full stack because, it's a comment that goes back a long way that, you start off with an IDE and eventually it turns into an operating system. And so slowly these IDEs want to be able to deploy the code, and they want it to be able to deploy it to their service living on top of the cloud platform. I think more and more of the stack will absorb these AI capabilities. It's just going to be the expectation in everything. So for me as an engineer, I'm sitting here going, oh, finally, if I'm using an AI tool, I want my build pipeline fully AI enabled so that I don't have to go up, manually drag that stuff back or bring it back through an MCP and fix it on my laptop. I just want to see the fix out there in the wild, and then I can go to GitHub or whatever my repo is, look at the pull request and go, thank you, LLM, you solved the problem, you fixed the bug, it all looks good. So yeah, I think, and we sort of said this at the start, software engineering is the start of, I think, something bigger in the workplace. These tools were built by software engineers, so not surprisingly, it was the problem space they knew. So it's not surprising this is the one that's really got a lot of traction and is really feeling transformative at the moment. It's like, hey, a pile of smart software engineers who helped build the idea of LLMs. The first tool they're going to go after is the one they sit in all day. But I think we're going to see more and more of this. So we're talking a lot, and I'm hearing this from my team of architects that, hey, I can design epics at a technical level in the LLM now. So it's not just writing the code, but it's actually doing the technical planning. And I think the business planning, we're seeing a lot of that as well. It's not much good just having a pile of engineers who can write code if they don't know what they're doing. So now the people doing the product planning and the business planning are relying on these. So it's really all the way from how does this get to people's desktops? How is it maintained? How are those updates done? All the way back to how can we think about great new ideas for products? It affects that whole pipeline. And if you leave part of it out, it sort of doesn't work.
Right. Exactly right.
No, love that. I mean, just to end maybe Nate, sorry about that. Nate, building on what Andrew says here, is it like, we're going to see all areas of the organization start to play around with these tools? And if so, what are organizations going to have to do to respond to that? Or maybe the answer is nothing. They're going to embrace all this citizen developer type activity.
Yeah, I really do see what's happened with coding assistants as the model for how you, as an individual, work with AI in the future.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks about the chatbot interface, and that's certainly one that makes sense. But integrated interfaces that take whatever task you're trying to do and integrate AI into that so that you are doing your task, being advised on how to do your task, have the grunt work and the difficult parts taken out by an AI, assistant that's right there with you. that's exactly how we're all going to eventually do our jobs, especially those people who have something in their head that needs to make it into some other form, right? Which is a lot of jobs. So that kind of aspect, I think this is just setting the pattern and the template for what it looks like. And the software engineers are seeing that before everyone else. But, right now, I think people need to start thinking about, whether you're a software engineer or not, how do I start taking those problems? Just like Andrew said, something's bugging me. I've got a problem to solve. I've got an issue I've got to do. Instead of just cranking away on it the way you normally would, how do you start thinking about taking that to an AI format to at least get started, get some ideas, be able to understand what direction you might be able to go? In some cases, as long as you're within your company's policies, maybe building something that will help you do your job better, even if you're not a software engineer, because there's opportunities for the AI to help you do that. So that's just going to help us all move even faster into the truly AI-enabled organization.
Yeah, love it. Well, we'll end there. We'll have the two of you on again real soon, because I'm sure just within a couple weeks or, certainly a month or two, things will change yet again, and we'll have to have this conversation all over again. But this was worthwhile for sure, and thank you to the both of you for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks.
Okay, what today's conversation makes clear is that AI in software development isn't a future state. It's already reshaping the way work gets done. The leaders aren't the ones chasing every new tool. They're the ones building the readiness, the guardrails, and the team dynamics to use these tools well. The key lesson is AI doesn't replace the fundamentals of good engineering. It amplifies them. The organizations that win will be the ones that pair accelerated tools with thoughtful structure, strong mentorship, and a willingness to rethink how ideas move from concept to code. If you found this episode useful, share it with a colleague and leave us a rating or a review. It helps more people discover the show. This episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast was co-produced by Naz Baker, Kara Kuhn, Maggie Ryan, and Stephanie Hammond. Our audio and video engineer is John Knobloch. My name is Brian Felt. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.